Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the ChatGPT workshop. My name is Janice Kung, and I am a health sciences librarian from the University of Alberta Library. And we're really excited to present this workshop to students. So hopefully we're having, most undergraduate, graduate students at the university here, so you can learn some good tips and tricks on how to use ChatGPT effectively. Before we jump into the content, I have a quick poll that I would like to share with all of you just to gauge how many of you have actually used ChatGPT before. So I'll give everyone a few seconds here. So if you've used it once, a few times, feel free to put that. Often, feel free to select that, or you've never used it, and that's perfectly fine too. So let's see what kind of experience you have amongst the participants today. Okay, we'll give it 5 more seconds here. Okay. So it looks like there is a good mix. So there are probably the majority, I would say, that have actually used it. Very interesting. And about a quarter of you have never used it. So thank you so much for participating in that. Okay. So in terms of what we'll be covering today for our workshop, we're going to provide a really quick overview of what is AI. We'll learn some definitions and see how they pertain to ChatGPT. And then we'll take a closer look at ChatGPT and look at the strengths and limitations of that tool. And we'll also talk about the implications for you as students. What do you need to know about ChatGPT? So what is AI, or artificial intelligence? I think many of us have actually been using AI in our lives, and it's an umbrella term for any theory, computer system, or software that is developed to allow machines to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And sometimes when we talk about AI, there are many different facets of that, and we can break them down into these 3 main stages. So stage 1 is kind of, early stages of AI. We call that machine learning or artificial neural intelligence. This is where the computer specializes in one area to solve a specific problem. And so again, we're already seeing this with Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, those kinds of tools. And when the AI gets developed further, then we move on to stage 2, which is called machine intelligence or artificial general intelligence. And this is where the computer is generalized to solve problems as well as any human. So under further refinement, the AI is getting really advanced. Then it moves on to stage 3, called machine consciousness or artificial superintelligence. And this is where we're getting kind of the Terminator vibes, Black Mirror type of situation, where the computer's intellect is much smarter than the best humans in all fields. So looking at these 3 stages, where do you think ChatGPT is currently at? So I'm going to put another poll here. And let's see what you think. Is ChatGPT at stage 1, 2, or 3? So we're getting some good responses. Excellent. What do you think? It's kind of tricky to tell, isn't it? Okay, we'll give it 5 more seconds here. Okay, thank you so much for participating. So it looks like there's an overwhelming majority of you who think that ChatGPT is in stage 2. The actual answer is stage 1, believe it or not, because ChatGPT is only specialized to solve one problem where typing in text-based prompts and it's returning text-based answers. So it's actually stage 1. So we're actually far off from stage 3. We don't have to panic just yet, right? So again, we're not hitting the Terminator vibes quite yet. Still fairly early days. Here are some of the major tech players in this space. It's important for you to be aware of the companies involved in developing these kinds of technologies. And in the interest of time today, we'll only discuss ChatGPT just because it's kind of the flavor of the month. Everyone's talking about it. And it's good to be aware that ChatGPT is developed by the company OpenAI. And you'll also see Microsoft listed here because it has a majority stake in OpenAI, which is why we've been hearing about Bing in the news every once in a while, because Bing is powered by OpenAI. So you can kind of see those connections there between these companies. Let's talk about some definitions and terminology so that we can have a better understanding of ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. So the first one for you to be aware of is natural language processing, or NLP. This is a type of AI where the computers can support and manipulate human language. So they're really trying to build in the linguistics piece so that we can get computers to do some advanced things for us. So some examples are machine translation, spell check, Google autocomplete when you're searching in Google, or even when you're using your phones, when you're typing in some text and it's giving you that text prediction for the next word. That is considered natural language processing. And it's also adapting to you specifically based on your history of how you're using those tools. So that's NLP. Then when we look at large language models, or LLMs, it's essentially natural language processing times 100, times 1,000. So the large language models can perform a variety of natural language processing tasks, and it looks like it understands the nuances of language. So that's where we're kind of getting freaked out a little bit and thinking, oh, is the computer sentient? Does it actually understand what I'm saying? Well, stay tuned and you'll learn more about that. Is that true or not? Then we talk about generative AI. So this is kind of an umbrella term that is describing any type of AI system using those large language models as the engine that runs it. So for example, we're seeing lots of these tools that can generate text or even images or other media in response to how we're typing in the prompts. So that's kind of generative AI, the broader umbrella term to describe these kinds of tools. So in order to understand how generative AI tools work, let's look at large language models a little bit more closely and take a step back. So large language models, they're using statistical models to analyze huge amounts of data. So they're learning the patterns and the connections between words and phrases. So they're learning about the whole grammatical structure in a really mathematical way so that it can calculate the probability of the next word or sequence of words. And how they're doing this is they're creating tokens, which are mapping text to numbers. And so you can see this example here. They are kind of color coding the different types of tokens. So you can see how they're assigning the tokens to common words or phrases in the English language. And so, of course, the most common large language model that we're all familiar with and that you're probably here for is ChatGPT. So let's focus on ChatGPT a little bit more. And there's a question in the chat. Yes, everyone will get a recording of the presentation afterwards, including the slides. So yes, you will definitely have access to all of that and you can review it afterwards. So thank you for that question. So what is ChatGPT? GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And essentially, it's an AI chatbot where users, we can engage in human-like conversation by posing questions or prompts into the ChatGPT website, and it will return a response within seconds. And we'll see some examples of how it is doing this. ChatGPT was launched for the public in November of last year, and they also recently launched a paid version called ChatGPT Plus, and that was released March of this year. And the subscription is $20 US per month. So if you're really curious, you want to learn more about ChatGPT, feel free to go onto their website. And the link is provided in the slides, the ChatGPT main website. And then you can sign up for a free account and you can play. You can experiment and learn how that tool actually works. So there is that free version, but there's also the paid version as well. In order to understand how ChatGPT was developed, it's important for you to understand how these LLMs are made. So these are the steps that usually happens with these tools. So let's take a look at each of these steps one at a time in the context of ChatGPT. Okay, step one, ChatGPT, they're collecting vast amounts of data called training data. So what kind of training data is feeding in to ChatGPT? You can see on this table, there are 5 main data sets going into GPT. And each training set was given a weighting used to calculate the probability of what that next word should be in the sentence. So let's look at the first one, Common Crawl. Common Crawl is essentially internet data or Google through mid-2021. So you can see that more than half of ChatGPT is based on information from the internet. And so we can also say the Common Crawl is analogous to Google. So it's crawling whatever it can scan on the web, and they're also indexing it. And so these bots are scanning the stuff on the internet and storing this as data. They're also taking a look at all of the links that is kind of like taking them through all these different rabbit holes on the internet. And they're also saving and collecting the metadata behind those websites. The next data set is Web Text 2. These are web pages that have been shared in Reddit posts that have received at least 3 upvotes. The next data sets you can see are books 1 and 2. So they have a collection of books that are feeding into that training data set, but OpenAI did not disclose what exactly are the book titles from those 2 main book data sets. And of course, they're pulling things from Wikipedia. So you can see here's the data set that was used to train GPT-3. So what is the 3? If you look at that green box on the right, you can see that OpenAI has kind of revised those different iterations of their chatbot. So when they first developed GPT, it was version 1 back in 2018. And when they kind of moved on, they've been improving, enhancing their tool. And so now this data set is for GPT-3, the 3rd version. And of course, the public free version, ChatGPT, it is based off of GPT 3.5, which is probably around the same data sets we see here for GPT-3. And for the paid version, ChatGPT Plus, that they use GPT-4 for that. So you can see how they keep moving the different iterations. And of course, OpenAI has not made public what GPT-4 was trained on. So you can kind of see the history or the trajectory of how ChatGPT actually evolved through those different iterations. So that's the training data. Let's continue with our process. ChatGPT is now going to transform that data into tokens. Remember, they're trying to put the text into numbers so they can do those fancy mathematical calculations on the back end. And then they're going to just let the tool do its own learning. It's what's called unsupervised learning. And basically, ChatGPT is taking that vast amount of data, trying to identify the patterns of how language is formed. So it's going to do a lot of this unsupervised learning. And then it's going to do some fine tuning as well. The humans are going to ask ChatGPT to perform some new tasks, more guidelines. After that, ChatGPT is going to get some reinforcement learning now with the human. So the human will be rating responses based on the responses by ChatGPT. And some will have really good ratings, some not so good. So ChatGPT will do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. After that reinforcement learning, then they're ready to deploy it to the public. And again, the free version is based off of GPT 3.5. And so that is the one that I'll be talking more about today with my examples. And there you have it. Those are all the steps on how large language models are made in the context of ChatGPT. And that was actually a lot of, oh, and there's a question there. Who are the reinforcement learning humans? That's very interesting. So some of it are, this will be covered later on. Thank you so much for that question. So some of them could be staff from OpenAI, or they're outsourcing it to third-party companies that do that. So we'll get to that in a moment. So hang on to that thought. So that's a very good question about the reinforcement learning. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Let's take a quick mental break and take a look at this cute cat picture. Are there any other questions as we reflect on how large language models are made? I always like to give a nice cat picture as a reprieve for our brains. So you can just think of this cat as, reminding their person to be cautious when using ChatGPT, because it's not so easy. It's not so clear cut. Okay, so the steps that I provided earlier was kind of complicated, wasn't it? Like who is doing this reinforcement learning, which, sometimes companies don't disclose that. I'm assuming it could be, staff from that own company, but it could also be outsourced as well. So it's a lot. It's a lot of information. Let's think of it this way. Let's break it down so that it's simpler for us to understand. What ChatGPT is doing basic text prediction. It's predicting what that next word should be as it's providing that response to us, right? So we have a sentence here. The student studied in the blank. ChatGPT is going through all of the tokens in their data set to see what is the most probable word that should end this sentence. Library seems like the most plausible word, right? Water park, maybe some students are studying at the water park, but very unlikely, right? And so ChatGPT will say the students study in the library. That's the most probable word that should appear there. So now that you understand this word probability calculation that it's doing on the back end, at scale, you can see how these systems can extrapolate to sentences, paragraphs, and full-fledged essays. In other words, think of these large language models as really fancy word calculators. It can't think for itself. Just like a calculator, when you punch in 2 plus 3 and it returns 5, does the calculator actually understand what 5 means? Of course not. The same thing applies with these large language models. They don't know what they're saying when they're responding to you. It's simply a super sophisticated parrot that can return sequences of words back to you that actually make sense. So when we are typing in a prompt or a question, and it returns something super quick, right? What sort of spices should I use? Oh, you should use black pepper, oregano, and thyme. You're thinking, oh my goodness, this is like speaking to a human. Does it actually understand what I am asking? This is amazing. This is incredible, right? But when you break it down, it's just really fancy math working in the back end that's calculating those probabilities. What should that next word be? And the next, and the next. So that's how you can think of it, because sometimes if people don't really understand how it's actually working, they're thinking that this computer is super advanced, it's going to take over the world. But again, remember, we're only at stage 1. We're not quite there yet. In order to capitalize on how to use ChatGPT effectively, you have to know something about prompt generation, prompt engineering. You might hear those two words used interchangeably. So what this means is when we want to use these tools, any generative AI tool, we have to enter a prompt into it, and then it will return something to us. So this is actually fast becoming an essential skill to be a really good prompt engineer or good prompt generator. And this might likely be a whole profession in and of itself in the future. So let's take some time here to learn about how can we write really good prompts. Since we need quality ingredients to make a good meal, the same can be applied for getting good quality responses from ChatGPT. We need really good prompts. So how you write your prompts will influence the accuracy and relevance of the responses. So let's take a look at some tips on how we can write good prompts. This is a framework that might be easier for you to remember some of the concepts of how we can interact with generative AI tools. So we're going to use this CLEAR framework to help us remember how to write good prompts. So let's start with the first one, C, concise. When you're writing prompts, you want to be very specific. But at the same time, you want to use simple language. Don't be overcomplicated and provide a lot of background and flowery information. Just include the critical information. Let's imagine that you're a sociology student and you're writing about the societal impacts of the Industrial Revolution. We don't want to ask something vague like, what causes society to change? Instead, you probably want to say, list 3 of the most significant social factors during the Industrial Revolution. Here is an example of what kind of responses that ChatGPT returned for both of those prompts. So you can see on the left, the vague one, what causes society to change? It's giving us a wide gamut of responses, right? Like it's going all the way back, talking about the invention of the printing press. And then you're wondering, why is it giving me stuff going that far back? That's not what I meant, right? So when you're more specific, you specify what you want in what context, then it's returning better results. So we mentioned, okay, we want the Industrial Revolution. Now it's giving us something more relevant. They're talking about the migration of people from rural areas to urban centers. The next concept is logical. You want to structure information in order, have a bit of a logical flow to it. You can also think of it as having a conversation with a chatbot. And this is completely original. It has never before been seen that we can have a conversation with a chatbot and it remembers, which is amazing. And so one thing you can also think about is establishing context and relationships, and also don't include too many instructions in one prompt. For example, maybe you want to learn more about the Eiffel Tower. You're not going to ask all of these questions at once. Instead, bring it down to bite-sized chunks. Enter them one at a time. You're going to type in, tell me about the history of the Eiffel Tower. It's going to return something amazing, I'm sure. And then say, okay, were there any major controversies surrounding the project? Notice how the project, we don't have to define that we're talking about the Eiffel Tower because it remembers, right? Although I'm saying remember, we have to be cautious here that it's not intelligent. It doesn't know what we're saying. It's just words that it's returning to us. And I even use those words to kind of describe it as like I'm talking to a human, right? So we just have to always be mindful, take a step back, not a human, it's just doing fancy word calculations on the back end. So I've even fallen into that trap, right? I even said, oh, it remembers, but it doesn't remember. So we have to remember that. Okay. The next concept is explicit. You want to define what you want ChatGPT to return to you. So one example is maybe you're reading your textbook, maybe in medicine, or you're reading a complicated engineering passage from your textbook, and you just want to understand it a little bit better. So you can put into ChatGPT, could you explain the following passage? And then put that passage in quotation marks, and then it will return something simpler for you to be able to understand it. So that's another way that you can write really good prompts. Another thing you can do is to set reading levels or output formats. So instead of saying how to apply for the Marie Curie Fellowship, you can be a bit more explicit in your instructions by stating the reading level and output format. So you can say, please tell me how to apply for a Marie Curie Fellowship. Please limit your answer to 5 points and tell it to me like I'm a 10-year-old. So there you go. We're limiting the output format and the reading level. And ChatGPT has a number of output formats that you can ask it to return. So looking at that green box there, you can ask it to just have a summary of something or a code. For those in computing science, maybe you're trying to figure out a code, it's not working right. You can even put the entire code into ChatGPT and say, can you see what is wrong with this code? It is not running properly. Fix this code or something like that. And then it will return a code. Hopefully they would have fixed it. So lots of different outputs you can make ChatGPT return, which is kind of interesting. You can also assign a role for ChatGPT to play. For example, maybe you're trying to have a better grasp of the Krebs cycle for science. So you can ask, or not ask, you can prompt, you can write this. You are an undergraduate science student. Describe the Krebs cycle in simple terms. Or maybe you're in business and you're doing a marketing course, and you can even enter as a prompt, imagine you're a public relations representative dealing with a social media crisis. Draft a press release that acknowledges the issue, explains what actions your company is taking, and reassures the public. So you can see lots of specific things that we want ChatGPT to do. So let's take a closer look at the Krebs cycle example. This is an example of how ChatGPT would reply. And it would say, sure, I'd be happy to describe the Krebs cycle. They provide a few sentences that seems fairly straightforward. And then they even break it down to the different components of that. Here's how it works. So that seems pretty nice for someone who's trying to learn these new concepts, right? The next concept is adaptive. Prompt generation is such a new thing. We were not taught this in our previous education. So it's something that we have to be flexible and continue to evolve with these tools. So if you're getting responses that's not really working right, try rephrasing or restructuring your prompt. And you can try to be creative with the prompts. For example, in preparation for this workshop, I asked ChatGPT, well, what are the ethical concerns with using ChatGPT? It returned something like this. It seems fairly good, but I wanted more. I was not very satisfied with those because it seemed fairly straightforward about the privacy, data security. By the way, don't put any confidential or sensitive information into it because it is owned by a company and we cannot trust what they're doing with our data, right? They could be taking our data and feeding it back into the cogwheel that is ChatGPT to continue training it. So be very careful about that. Sorry, I had to take a sidestep there. So anyways, we're getting this response from ChatGPT. Okay, but I'm not so happy with it. I think I want more, right? So then I'm going to rephrase, or I'm going to try a different approach. So then I'm going to have a follow-up prompt. Well, can you provide 3 more examples? Sure enough, it did. Certainly, here are 3 more examples. And then it goes on and on. So think about that. If you're not satisfied with it, keep trying. You can even write, actually, that is not what I meant. Can you describe it in this other way, this other context? And it will do it. And then it might even apologize to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I interpreted your question wrong or whatever. So it's kind of fun. You can actually have a conversation with a chatbot doing fancy math calculations on the back end. And the last concept is reflective. Many people who use generative AI tools like ChatGPT think that it's this amazing, super amazing sentient being, and they think that ChatGPT will just never ever be wrong. But that's actually not true. It can definitely be wrong, and it will be confidently incorrect. And the problem here is that it has no idea that it's wrong. It's not fact checking, and it will present itself as the authority. So for those who were here earlier, I had that example about the U of A green and gold colors, right? Didn't that sound very authoritative, that response? But when you actually fact check it, it's inaccurate. And the problem with these generative AI tools is that it will never say, I don't know. And that's dangerous. So you want to be very careful. Evaluate the responses you're getting and also identify areas on how you may improve your prompts so that it doesn't kind of go off the rails. And also think critically. How can you further refine your prompts to engage with these tools better? So you always want to trust, but verify. Very important. Now let's talk about some of the strengths and limitations with using ChatGPT. For many of you as students, I've kind of identified these two main strengths for all of you. The first one is for writing. And we're not saying here that we're just going to have ChatGPT write our papers for us. No. We want it to help us just generate some ideas to kickstart your creative process. So we can have ChatGPT help us brainstorm some research topics, maybe even change citation styles. Maybe for your paper, you thought your instructor wanted APA style, but actually they wanted MLA. So you can just have ChatGPT change the citation style for you. That's not cheating. That's just using a tool for the right function. You can also have it to do some editing and proofreading for your paper, or even have ask ChatGPT for suggestions on where you can find good literature for your topics when you're writing your papers. You can also have this tool help you with learning and studying. For example, just have it explain complex concepts. You can have it summarize information from textbooks if it's not quite catching on, quite gelling with the content that you're trying to absorb. You can also use it to practice second languages. So for those of you in learning French or Korean, you can actually type the language in ChatGPT and it will have a conversation with you in that language. It's kind of amazing. So lots of learning opportunities here. But one thing I will caution you is that when you ask ChatGPT to explain things to you, like explain complex concepts, explain in simple terms, you have to remember that it can be wrong. It can be wrong. So you always need to think critically on whatever you're reading, because they're not fact checking. They're just calculating that probability of what that next word should be, and the next, and the next. Those are some strengths. Let's talk about limitations. So of course, there are limitations. There are four main problems with ChatGPT. The first one is limited knowledge, and that only applies to the free version, the ChatGPT. The paid one, I think it's up to date. They have data up until 2023 because they're pulling data from the internet live. But for the free version, there is limited knowledge because the data ends as of September 2021. And it's also not replicable. Whenever I type in a prompt and then I try the same prompt a few days later, a few weeks later, sometimes it changes. And the reason why is because it's probabilistic on how it's returning responses to us. So we might not get the same answer twice. And of course, there are problems with misinformation, bias, and there are many ethical concerns. And because the first one is pretty straightforward, so let's skip that one and we will focus on the last three problems in that order. Let's talk about misinformation first. Sometimes ChatGPT is wrong. It makes stuff up. Well, actually, that is a misnomer because ChatGPT can't make anything up because it doesn't understand what it's saying. So let's rewind. I'll rephrase. See, I told you, I always make that mistake. ChatGPT generates incorrect responses from time to time, and that is called hallucinations. Why is this? Remember, it's based on the probability of the words, of how it should return the words to us. And also it's based on the AI model's inherent biases and training data that it has. So of course, there's bias out there on the internet, which means that whatever ChatGPT spits out at us will also be biased, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And OpenAI themselves, they have also stated, quote, these hallucinations are particularly problematic in domains that require multi-step reasoning, since a single logical error is enough to derail a much larger solution. So they even recognize this to be a problem. Let's take a look at some of the hallucinations that come up. A few months ago, there's a user that put this into ChatGPT. When did Leonardo da Vinci paint the Mona Lisa? And it returned an incorrect response. Of course, I had to test this, right? So a few weeks ago, I put in the same prompt in ChatGPT, and it's correct now. Hooray! So let's think about this. It was wrong before, it's correct now, but it could be broken tomorrow. The model is always changing. Perhaps some of you are thinking, well, this is the most amazing tool since sliced bread. I'm going to use this to write my papers for you. So let's imagine you put this prompt into ChatGPT. Provide one paragraph summarizing gender-based violence and climate change with citations in APA format. Please include the reference list at the end. And by the way, you don't want to do this, and you'll see why. So it's returning a very nice paragraph for us, including in-text citations that I have highlighted here. Then you're going to continue scrolling down to look at that reference list. And this is where you run into problems. So when I did this, I looked at each of those references. They don't exist. They're fake references, entirely made up. A total hallucination. So if you're thinking of using ChatGPT in this way, you probably don't want to do this because it's going to be a lot more work for you to fact check and to go back and to fix that paper because it's based on false information. Very problematic. If you want to use ChatGPT to help you with citations generation, you want to be very careful and you want to verify. So here are the steps that you can go through. Step one, does it exist? What you can do is you can take that citation information, you can copy and paste the article title or the book title into our library's website or into Google to see, does it exist, first of all. If it doesn't, then maybe you want to ask more details. Could you provide an ISBN or an ISSN for that publication? ISBN is the International Standard Book Number, and ISSN is the International Standard Serial Number. So these are unique identifiers for publications so that we can distinguish between books, journals, magazines, that kind of thing. So that's just a good way to double check. Does that thing actually exist? Okay, after step two, we were able to verify that publication exists. But wait, you're not done yet. You have to verify that the information was summarized correctly. So now we have to consult the source material to see, did ChatGPT summarize that information accurately? Because it could be wrong. So you have to do a lot of additional cross-checking and verifying. That is very important. Okay, that was a lot of talking on my part. I think it's fun for you to do a little activity to see how you would search for these two citations. So I would like you to spend some time to do a search and see which citation is fake, A or B. And to help you make your lives easier, I am going to put the citations in the chat so you can copy and paste the information here. So here is A, and here is B. So I'll give everyone a few minutes here to do that. And for those of you who are not as familiar with the library website, I will also put the link in chat and we'll see how you do. Are they both okay? Are they real? Or are they both fake? We'll see how you do. I'll give everyone about 2 to 3 minutes here. Okay, we're getting some answers in. Excellent. And yes, I will show a demo of how I would do it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good questions. And 1 more minute. Hey, lots of good responses in chat. This is great. And we're seeing some consensus in the chat. That's always very promising. Okay, time's up. Okay, good job, my friends. Yes, A is fake, B is real. Let's see how I would do it. Let's get out of our slides here. And I'm going to first go to the library website for the first one there. So this is how I would do it. So let's copy the article title, Beyond Dichotomies. And here is our trusty library website. I'll make it bigger here so everyone can see. And I'm just going to copy and paste that article title right into the chat. And no results. But one thing I will caution you is that when you see no results the first time, you want to do one extra step. And this is kind of annoying, unfortunately, in on the library page. You see how under the limits that it's limiting our results to the catalog only? We want to turn that off. Turn that off because we want to see as much information as possible. And by default, they only limited results when users search our library website to limit to only items that's in our library in the catalog. So let's turn that off and give it another try because sometimes that will return things. So I'm going to rerun that search again. And no changes. So no results were found. Okay. So that already is telling me, red flags, right? Let's try Google just for fun. Let's see. I'm going to paste the article title again in Google. And let's have a quick look here. So beyond dichotomies, gender and intersecting inequalities, this one, the first one, looks promising, doesn't it? It looks like the same title, but let's click into it. And then we can now try to verify the information in this citation. Okay, so we see that the authors is Judy. I'm probably butchering the name. I apologize. So that looks right, the author's name. And Locatelli, yes. Vast. Okay, so the author names look fairly good. How about the year? 2016, 2016, perfect. Okay, title, we have confirmed that is the same title. Let's keep, well, not quite. Not exactly the same, is it? Beyond dichotomies is the same. Gender and intersecting inequalities in, look at that. It's a different title. So you can see how that's some hallucinations going on with ChatGPT. It's just calculating the probability of that next word. You can also see the journal title is different. Climate and development, no. It's actually Ambio. Ambio is the journal name. The volume, issue, and page numbers are all different. So we can tell that is a complete fabrication, does not exist. Let's look at the next one. I'm going to copy my article title once again. Let's return to our library website and let's do it again. Okay, and there is one result, so that's good. We want to verify though. So let's have a look at all the pieces of information. The authors look the same, Desai and Mandal. 2022, perfect. The title looks the same. And our journal, Environmental Policy and Law, correct. Volume and issue, 5256, perfect. Page numbers look good. And the DOI is also the same. We have verified that. Excellent. Okay, so that is how you can determine whether or not the citations are true or not true. Any questions about that? Many of you got the right answer, which is wonderful. So very good question. The reason why it's returning fake references is, remember, it's not fact checking, right? It's not going out into the internet, into the web to determine, does this thing actually exist? It's just calculating the probability of those words. And so that's where sometimes it gets messed up, because it's just calculating, well, you know, the next probability, the probability of the next word after context could be climate change. Sure, let's add climate change after context, right? Cameroon, yeah, that sounds great. Let's add Cameroon after that, because they're using the probability when they calculate those words. Remember the tokens? That's all it's doing. So it's not actually going to the actual journals to return that citation to us. And that's why we're getting those hallucinations. Great question. So is in the original text, is the information actually derived from the article? It could be. It could be, because ChatGPT could be simply copying and pasting the text from publications. That's possible. Or it could be making stuff up as well. So that's why it's so hard to tell with these things, right? Because it's proprietary. That tool is so proprietary. We don't know exactly the algorithm, how it's working on the back end. So that's why it could be returning false information. So there's another really good question here, and I'll just read it to everyone. So sometimes people like to play around with ChatGPT, right? Like 2 plus 2 equals, like you ask ChatGPT, what is 2 plus 2? And it says 4, but then you're trying to be kind of devious, right? And then you say, well, actually, that's not correct. I think it should be 5. And then you have this weird conversation back and forth with the chatbot until it finally agrees with you. Like, okay, you're right. It is 5, right? The reason why that is happening is because we don't understand really how the chatbot was designed from OpenAI. So there might be some things where it's trying to appeal to the user. So in the end, it might just agree, even though it's not factual information, right? So that's my best answer on why it's agreeing with us when we are saying this thing is actually fact. And it's like, oh, okay, sure. whatever you say, that is fact, right? So it could be doing all these weird things on the back end. So that's why we always have to be very critical on what we're reading. And you can even play around with ChatGPT to try to fool it, right? Canada is the largest country in the world. And it'll probably say, actually, no, it's Russia. And they're like, are you sure? I think based on my research, Canada is the largest country in the world. And then once you kind of have this back and forth banter with the chatbot, in the end, it's like, okay, sure, yes, you are correct. I was wrong, right? So who knows? Who knows how these technologies work? Lots of things working on the back end that we really have not much information on what is happening. Okay, so let's move on to the other problem. I kind of hinted at this earlier about the bias. So remember, bias exists in the training data itself because it's pulling from the internet. What do we have on the internet? Lots of the bad, terrible stuff, right? Sexism, racism, homophobia, all of these things exist out there in the internet, which means that the training data will have this embedded into it. And it also has a Western English focus because it was developed in the United States. So you want to be mindful about that. And there could be gaps in the training data. So there could not be enough information about certain types of content, certain types of information. So you always want to be mindful of what is missing. And that's why it's giving us that a lot of information that may be biased. So also remember that only we humans have the skill set to think critically, conduct that nuanced research, and fact check. Ethical concerns. Oh my goodness, there are many. But in the interest of time, I'll only mention 3, and let's see what else you can come up with in the audience today. So copyright. More than half of the training data came from the internet, most of which is material under copyright. And OpenAI did not seek consent or offered compensation. So this raises some questions about how they got that training data. In fact, several authors have actually filed lawsuits alleging that OpenAI's ChatGPT, they copied and used their books without permission. And this is currently unsettled case law. And we don't yet know how this will play out in the courts. So back to the original question, there was a question earlier about who's doing that reinforcement learning, right? So part of that could be the outsourcing, as I mentioned earlier. So one problem is that ChatGPT and other generative AI tools is only possible with mass human curation. And OpenAI used outsourced Kenyan laborers earning less than $2 per hour to help us make ChatGPT less toxic. So this was an investigation that Time found. And so they wrote up a really interesting article about it. And the workers, because they were trying to remove the toxic content, they were traumatized and they were exposed to data sets, including violent sexual assaults and child abuse materials. So lots of terrible things going on here. And so sometimes we forget about that, right? That we think, oh, well, it's just a computer, it's AI, there's no human involved. But actually, there was a lot of human intervention, a lot of human processing to help us clean the data, to make it less toxic, all of that stuff. So lots of things to think about. Also, we're slowly having an over dependency on AI, we might say, because we're relying heavily on these AI language models. Could that be diminishing our human critical thinking skills and agency, which is leading to an over dependence on AI for decision making? So that's not great, right? So it makes you think, should we really rely on these AI tools or not? So those are only 3 examples of some ethical concerns, but can you think of others? Let's see what you come up with in the chat. Feel free to type it in the chat. Any other concerns? Any thoughts about this? No thoughts. Okay, I'll give another big one. Oh, let's see, data security, excellent. Makes it easier for ghostwriters to publish. That's an excellent point, Amy. Yes, excellent. So those are two good examples. So another big ethical concern is about the environment, because we're using a lot of computing power to make generative AI tools work. That's a lot of a huge carbon footprint to make it work for us. And I actually made a really conscious decision not to show live demos of ChatGPT for that reason, because for every 40 prompts that is entered into ChatGPT, that is the equivalent of 1 liter of drinking water that we're wasting to cool those servers. So that's not great, right? And what if hackers hack the software? Yes, absolutely. So it's not great. It's not great, right? So lots of things to think about. And I'm sure there are more. So it makes me really aware and conscious of how I'm using these tools because of that, all these factors, right? Data security, copyright issues, environment. So lots and lots of issues here. And I can see that we are running short on time. So I'm going to go very quickly on now. What are the implications for you as students? Please check with your instructor on whether or not you can use ChatGPT for your courses, because they will have different takes on it. So check the expectations in your course syllabus for each course. For those in graduate school, a key attribute to your education is the need to critique and criticize content and methods. And of course, this also applies to generative AI tools. And the Code of Student Behavior at the U of A has that statement: no student shall represent another substantial editorial or compositional assistance on an assignment as the student's own work. So when you submit your work created by generative AI tools, that would be considered cheating. So be very careful there. We're not saying don't use it. If you're allowed to use ChatGPT, please make sure you're transparent about it and cite it. The U of A library actually created a really nice guide. I'm just going to make this larger here on how you can cite generative AI tools. So I'm going to put this in the chat so you can use that as a reference. And if you scroll further down, it gives you examples on how you can cite ChatGPT using the different citation styles, because you want to be transparent. If you are using it for certain purposes for your assignments, please indicate that. And of course, don't forget about the library. We remain an authoritative source to help you with specific questions. If you're trying to find literature for your papers, we are better than a bot, right? We won't lead you down the wrong hole. We're not going to hallucinate and give you wrong information. So very important there. And I know I gave you a lot of information, but I've also listed additional resources if you're interested in learning more about this, about how to write good prompts. I also found this really fun flowchart if you want to kind of use this as kind of like as a benchmark to see, is it safe to use ChatGPT? Maybe, maybe not. And there's a good question in the chat. Does GPT-4 give better or more accurate code outputs than 3.5? That's a great question. Unfortunately, I can't say for certain because I've never used GPT-4. I've never paid them because I'm just like, you know what? I don't feel I want to contribute to this. So, oh, and thank you, Tiffany. Oh, okay, thank you. Excellent. So Tiffany can provide insight. So it's the same, or it's more accurate. It's more accurate. That's Tiffany's response. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Yay, look at that. Hive mind, and better output. You get what you pay for, right? You get what you pay for. I would like to leave you all with some trivia before we close for today. Do you know the significance of this paper? The explosion in the media and capabilities of AI in the recent months and years can be traced down to this single research paper from Google in 2017, which is called Attention is All You Need. And this paper was revolutionary in describing a new model for natural language processing called the transformer. Aha, that's where the T is coming from in GPT. So it's just fascinating that sometimes one idea can really change the world. And I, of course, have the references that I use in this presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. And if you don't mind, I'm going to put the evaluation form in the chat. I just have 3 quick questions for you to answer to help us improve these sessions. And of course, you will get the recordings and the slides afterwards. So thank you so much and have a great day.